Hey, you. Yeah, you. What you doing? I know what I'm doing. I'm starting my week off right with Talking About The Blues podcast, baby.
What's going on? What's going on? You are now bluesing with the number one blues broadcast in New York City, Talking About The Blues, baby. Make sure you follow us on Twitter, Instagram, like the Facebook page, and subscribe to the website. Stay tuned for our live interviews, baby. Keep bluesing. What's going on, good folks? Once again, you are bluesing. We're Talking About the Blues podcast. And my guest today, if you remember, I spoke to the director and the producer for the documentary Satan and Adam about a blues duo coming out of Harlem, New York. Well, I'm speaking with Adam today, and we're going to get deep into talking about the blues because the story is amazing. Adam, what's going on, sir?
Hey, man, I'm just have a good time down here in Oxford, Mississippi, where I moved back in 2002 from way uptown New York.
Well, we're going to talk about that too, because you were up there.
I was up in Inwood for many years, way the 13th mile of Manhattan Island, yeah.
That's right, which is actually, I don't know how it was in the 80s, but right now it's actually a place to be. A lot of people are looking to move there.
Oh, I know, man. I went back and visited. I was actually just there in late July, early August of this year, and I couldn't believe the outdoor dining they had on Dyckman Street.
Absolutely, right?
Oh, it was amazing. Yeah, there was a place at the end of the block on Indian Road and 218th, which is basically just down the block from where I lived for 16 years. And they've got this Inwood, I think Indian Road, like little restaurant. And I thought, yeah, I remember when the guy, the Dominican guy who owned that place, got shot dead in his own place.
That's right.
You know, because I have those memories, because I remember that.
Right. Well, see, you know what?
Yeah.
It's okay, because we're going to get into that.
Okay.
We're going to get into that. Now,
fond memories of New York. Yeah.
Absolutely, because you were on the streets. And as a good segue into this is the fact that you are a master harpsman, okay, blues harpsman, right? And I want to say for those that don't know, but if you don't know, then there's a problem, because we all know I had the opportunity to see Adam blow live. This guy's amazing. So let's talk about your blues journey, because
Sure.
Now you have a book. Is it a hardback and auto, or is it both?
Yeah. Well, so back in the mid 1990s, I managed to actually, surprisingly, I kind of wrote a story about being part of this duo called Satan and Adam, and it was in Harper's Magazine. It was called Winter Blues, and it came out in 1995, I think. And an agent saw it, and she contacted me, and she said, I think there's a book here. And I said, I think you're right. And so I wrote a memoir in about 15 months, and that was published in 1998. That was published in hardcover by Pantheon and then Vintage. Then it went out of print after about 5 years, and University of Minnesota Press picked it up. There's a new kind of introduction to it that I did, and that came out back in 2009. And actually, just today I uploaded the audiobook to Audible, so it'll be on Amazon and iTunes and Audible probably in a couple of weeks. It's been out there for a year or so as an audiobook through TradeBit. But anyway, so there's several different versions of this memoir that I did that was about that whole experience with Sterling, and I'm sure you're going to ask me about that. So.
Well, yeah, I definitely am going to ask you about that, and I definitely want our listeners to seek this book. Me personally, I like the audio version of it because there's a flow in the story. The good thing about it is, well, one of the good things about it, because there's several, but with the flow and how you're telling the story, you can actually see the words on paper, and that's not easy to do, to be able to convey an audio book the same way a print book is laid out and have that flow. I thought that was really groovy.
Well, thanks. You know, it's funny. You know what? Part of my thing as a writer Here's what people wouldn't know is I spent basically 10 years, partly during the period when I was playing as a Harlem street musician. What I was also doing in some of my spare time was working really hard on a novel. And I don't think I'm a born novelist, although I'm finally self-publishing that thing. It's called Busker's Holiday. But point is, I spent years listening to sentences. I was like, I don't want to dignify it, but it's a little bit like being, you're Charlie Parker and you're sort of in the woodshed. I was in the woodshed as a writer, trying to write a novel. And so I learned how sentences work, learned how many words you could cut out of a sentence. It's not really that different from being a musician and being in the woodshed and playing the same stuff over and over and then breaking down your musical lines and saying, what's going to really work here? Where's the flow? And so when you're hearing that in the way I'm saying it, partly what you're hearing 10 years worth of work on a novel that is only just now going to get published. That was the sort of prelude to sitting down and just pouring out that memoir. But I had a lot of training, a lot of kind of self-imposed training. Again, my heroes as a writer were guys like Sonny Rollins, Brooklyn Bridge, to me that, and I actually used to go and play my harmonica at night out on Dyckman Street at the far extreme of Dyckman Street, right on the Hudson River. I would go down there, just drive a mile from my house, park, go out and play at night, kind of me and the river. Thinking about Sonny Rollins, thinking about that, it was like a model of, I didn't have this sort of solitary tortured artist thing. It was more like, here's a big open space. It's me and the river. Whatever I got's going to just be there. No reverb.
Right.
But it's also, there's an element of spiritual training, kind of. Again, it's not like the romantic tortured artist. I wouldn't go and get high and then play. I would just kind of go but I really wanted to kind of break down what I was doing and hear it in. You've got to have a lot of intrinsic. It's got to please you before it pleases anybody else. And to me, that was what Sonny Rollins was about. It's like he said, at this point in my creative development, I've got to go and play by myself and withdraw from performance and just go and kind of figure something out. I always loved that idea. Figure it out by yourself. Then you're able to walk back into the world,
right?
And maybe do whatever I did when you saw me down at Groove a few weeks back. Where you're kind of going in. It's showtime, and you're kind of on the spot.
Right. You're there because you've became one with it. You're comfortable with it. You're one with it.
You kind of own it.
Yeah. I dig that.
Kind of own it.
And that's another thing. So we can get to this journey of yours because in the 80s now, and I need the audience to understand, those who are not from New York, those who are from New York knows how New York was in the 80s.
Right.
So we're talking about somebody who, him and his harp was in the Hudson River Park, Riverside Park, Central Park. I mean, this was around the Central Park 5.
Yeah, that happened. That happened slightly later than, but I mean, that was all part of this general period.
Right. It wasn't the easiest place to be walking around late at night.
But my theory about this was there are places, and I thought about this when I was in Inwood Hill Park. I thought there are places that are so desolate, even the bad guys, they've decided there's nobody there.
Right.
They're afraid of it. So I was kind of a little bit crazy like that. But I was from a small town. I'm a Congers guy, right? I'm from Rockland County, north of the city. But so for me to be out in nature, in the dark, that was kind of nice. That was kind of comforting. You sort of asked about the journey, and I suppose we should probably try to take people back because people often get parts of this story wrong. So let me just sort of clarify a little bit, just so people understand what the journey is. In the autobiography, in the memoir, I go all the way back to sort of being a kid in suburban Rockland County and hearing music coming out of my father's office. He was listening to the freewheeling Bob Dylan. I just put that on the other day. I got his record, and so I'm hearing harmonica. I'm hearing stuff that was on the air in 74 and 75 on AM radio in New York, on WABC and WNBC. They very integrated pop radio. You had Gladys Knight one moment and the Ozark Mountain Daredevils the next moment and the Allman Brothers with Southbound. I mean, I grew up in that kind of environment, just hearing that music, bluesy, soulful, southern kind of music.
Right.
Again, I'm a Hudson River kid, right? But I'm hearing all that music. And you notice there's something cool in it. I'm hearing the Jay Giles Band with Magic Dick playing Whammer Jammer. That was the big record in my school in 74, 75. And I just decided one day I'm going to go and get a harmonica. I managed to figure out, I was a smart kid, but I figured if I'm that smart, I should be able to figure out how to play this dang thing. So I went to the Nanuet Mall and got my first Hohner Marine Band harmonica. I still play basically the same model. A lot of experience, between the time that I started playing the harmonica and the time that I first went into Harlem and played with Mr. Satan, this guitar man, that was 11 years. It was a lot of growth, a lot of experience. I was an undergrad student at Princeton playing funk guitar in basically a jazz funk fusion band, and I was the token blues guy in this band. This is the time when Stanley Jordan was a Princeton undergraduate, the great jazz guitar player who's out there now. There were, the guys in the Austin Lounge Lizards. There was a lot of music there, and it was an unusual time. People think Princeton, Ivy League. Again, I was sort of the townie at my little day school, so when people hear these words, they think they make decisions about who you are and where you've come from, and I always say, don't hold my education against me. I was just a guy who loved this music and did my best to play it. But the huge moment for me, it was big moments in 84, 85, and 86. In 84, I had that blues experience of the girl that I loved, that I'd been with for 5 years, my old college girlfriend, left me for a guy that I knew. We were all in graduate school, and what's that? That's just a big, bad, broken heart.
Right.
You respond to these things in different ways. If I'd had the money for a shrink, I probably wouldn't have had a blues life. But I had to deal with it by myself. And I made the decision to sort of head off to Europe with a friend. I'd always had harmonicas in my backpack. I took them along with me, and I ended up being a street musician in Harlem. Entirely kind of didn't plan on doing that. But I did that, and it broke my life open. And I came back to New York. My friends didn't recognize me. There was this crazy guy suddenly. I was grandiose. I'm writing a great American novel. I wrote a 450-page book in 14 weeks. I sat at my desk. Jack Kerouac was the model. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And it took me 10 years to finally kind of get the novel right. So part of what that process was you're writing a novel about busking. You don't know the first damn thing about busking. And then I got incredibly lucky. In the summer of 85, I was walking by Columbia, where I had been a graduate student, and a young black harp player named Nat Riddles, he's now the late Nat Riddles, became sort of my first serious blues mentor. This is a guy who grew up in Co-op City. He lived a really interesting life. He was part of the downtown New York blues scene. A place called Dan Lynch was where he kind of met a lot of people. And he heard me, and he said kind of like, who the hell is this kid playing this sort of unformed, but in some ways very good, in some ways not. Like I needed a lot. But he could hear what I needed, and he was driving a cab. He kind of hooked up with me as a sort of mentor-mentee relationship. And then I followed him around the streets of New York in 1985. People don't remember the Village Voice had a Street Entertainers Festival in the fall of 1985.
Right.
He and his group kind of played that. But I watched Nat all summer long, playing with his little mouse amp and a guitar player out by Astor Place Cube. I'm talking about crowds of 100 people on a Saturday night for solo blues harmonica player with just like a guitar player backing him up. This is the time when Stevie Ray Vaughan was out there. Blues was sort of happening in a way.
Right.
And I was Nat's guy. I was Nat's boy in a sense. I was his protege. Protege means protected. I didn't find that out until much later, but it means he's kind of shown. But we didn't have a lot of formal lessons, but he had me sit in. We kind of hung out, and then he disappeared from New York. And then I started playing solo in New York. I ran into a guitar player almost right away. We hooked up for a couple of months. He left, another guy, a couple of months. That second guy and I went back to Europe in 86, and at that point, we did it for real for 2 months. Sort of wandered around Europe. Broke up, and I found other guitar players. The point is I began to actually learn the thing that had transformed my life, but I began to dig down deeper. Now, here's the funny thing. Summer of 86, I come back home and I say, okay, that's it. Like many people who have music in their blood, I said, that was fun, but you really gotta straighten up, fly right, and get a straight job.
Right.
And it was at that moment I actually got one job downtown. I lasted precisely half a day. I quit at lunch.
Wow.
I mean, I couldn't do it. I was too crazy. And I was too much of, I don't know what it was. And it was a month after that I was driving through Harlem. I had gotten a job in Hostos Community College, which was in a bombed out part of the South Bronx, 149th and Grand Concourse.
Right, it's still there.
And I'm living in Inwood. It's like, how do you get there? Well, you can go kind of by way of the all the way around the east side, or you can go down the west side to 125th and cut across.
Right.
And that's what I did, and that was the moment that changed my life.
Mm.
And I cut across, and I'm a little nervous being in Harlem because people have always told me, don't go to Harlem. You're white, stay out of Harlem. And yet I'm driving, and then I hear this guy playing, and I realize, I stop my car and I watch him. Incredible guitar player. He's playing with one kind of hi-hat cymbal that was sort of just right on the pavement. He was right across from the State Office Building, right next to where the Studio Museum was at that point. It still is there, but it was by the phone company.
Right.
Anybody who worked in Harlem in the 80s would know that the phone company was just right there, and everybody paid their bills there. And here's this guy playing. And I said, I've seen that guy before. And then I had this really weird time travel moment. I said, before my girlfriend moved out, one night, like the fall before she moved out, she and I were walking by in the Columbia neighborhood and saw this guy with two other guys, like, making music.
Wow.
And it was like, I write about this in the memoir, it was like the blues reached out and touched me at that moment in some weird way. That was almost that. I mean, these guys all had these little mouse amps, and I remember talking to one of the guys, and he told me what kind of amp it was. That was the amp that I ended up getting and going to Europe with. So here I am. I've had 3 years worth of experience. I'm actually a pretty seasoned street musician, and I see this guy, and he's by himself. And I played with a dozen guitar men on the street. But here's a guy who's so far beyond anybody I've seen. And, I said, who's that? And somebody said, well, that's Satan, man. Everybody knows Satan. And I thought, Satan and Adam. I said, I got to play with this guy,
Right.
And I came back the next day, and, thanks for letting me run on, but,
no, it's okay.
I came back the next day, and I asked him if I could sit in, and he said, sure. He let me sit in. And we had a big crowd on the first song, which is, you always, as street musicians, you want to know you got an act that's going to grab people.
Right.
This was a block from the Apollo Theater, as everybody made sure that I remembered. People told me for years, they would say, well, the Apollo's right there, man. You got to have something.
Right. This is historical on so many levels, because it's an actual 150-year-old blues story that's actually happening.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm saying? In the 80s, which isn't that
in
far
the 80s,
away.
Yeah.
That's groovy. That's
and of course the funny thing. So we get all this money. I'm going from suddenly thinking, so Harlem is, supposed to be a place, if you're white, you don't go there, because everybody's remembering the 60s, and it was in the riots, and I grew up in the suburbs, so to the extent that I had any impression of what Harlem was, apart from knowing a little bit about the Harlem Renaissance in the 20s and early 30s, I'd read Invisible Man,
Right.
Riots in 36 and 40 and when it's 67, Mayor Lindsay. But I'm going from that to the first day that I played with him, I've got 3 or 4 people coming up afterwards, clap me on the shoulder. Who the hell are you? This is great. Glad you played with them. It was like a love fest, and I had a very strange feeling. Like, are people waiting for the Redeemer figure to sort of emerge from white America? I'm being. But there were ways in which people were giving me a vibe that was much more than my playing itself deserved, right? You're a symbol of something. So what you are, but it took me a long time to kind of deal with that element.
Okay.
And there was actually a prelude, by the way, that, playing with him on the street was not the first experience that I had of being embraced musically in Harlem. In fact, that had happened about a year earlier when I'd gone to the old Showman's Cafe and sat in with Tippy Larkin. No, actually, I went into La Famille on 125th and 5th Avenue because I'd run into some guy when I was just kind of jamming downtown on the street who said, basically, he said, my name's Kevin Rollins. I'm Sonny Rollins' nephew. Come to La Famille. So I'd actually had an experience of kind of stepping into a Harlem musical environment and having people say, "This is great. We haven't heard a harmonica player, like since Jimmy Reed."
Wow.
I had that kind of experience. So playing with him was a whole different sort of thing. It was a lot more. Well, it was on the street. So I still like playing on the street because I like the sort of rawness, the fact that you're close to the audience.
Yeah, you're right there.
You feel people, and but the funny thing about this period of time, and you know this because we were talking about this, is 2 months after I first play in Harlem in October of '86, I think that Howard Beach happens.
Right.
Right. And so when I think about that period, I think Howard Beach, and I think about the guy getting killed. I think was it Michael Griffith in Howard Beach? I think about Yusef Hawkins, which happened a little bit later, and I think about Crown Heights, which happened just as we were kind of leaving the streets, that we sort of gone off to Europe.
Right.
In other words, New York in that period was a tough place. Now, Mr. Satan used to say, well, they don't have that. The whole crack thing, the drive-by thing, that doesn't happen here in Harlem. That's all Brooklyn. Brooklyn and the Bronx.
Which is funny because I grew up in Brooklyn during that time, and though it was happening in Brooklyn, we was like, that's Harlem too.
It just wasn't happening on 125th during the daytime, and that was my primary experience. I mean, so you may be sure that in the years since that, and I played there with him between the fall of '86. Now I went off on the road with Big River, the Broadway show, playing harmonica.
Wow.
I did that in the fall of '87 for about 3 months. Then I came back, and he and I hooked back up. And then in May of '88, I did it for another month and a half. It was good money. It was a different kind, totally the opposite extreme.
Right.
In a pit band, you're playing 15 seconds worth of music and making really good money, and then sitting and reading a magazine till your next cue. It's very strange. Nothing like the street.
No, yeah, you got to give it up.
When I first got in a pit band, the conductor basically looked. The very first rehearsal, he looks at me, like over the tops of his glasses, and he says, "You cannot pat your foot that loud."
Wow. Wow.
And in Harlem, people were saying, "Hey, man, I like the way you pat your foot."
Right.
Literally, people would, I like the way you keep the beat. You really feel that beat. But in the pit band, no.
You can't do that. So now, what was the? Do you remember the song that you and Satan played that first moment?
Yeah, he said something like, "I got a little thing called Mojo that I want to do," and it was in the key of E, so I used an A harp. Of course, I was very familiar with "Got My Mojo Workin'," the sort of Muddy Waters Chicago blues kind of thing. His was a little bit different, and this was part of my educational process. And for anybody out there listening to this who's a student of the music and thinking the best way they can prepare themselves for that moment is to kind of listen to a whole bunch of classic Chicago blues and master the stuff those guys are doing, I would say yes, but because I had done that, and Nat Riddles had pointed me towards Big Walter Horton and John Lee Williams, Sonny Boy Williamson, Junior Wells, all that stuff. But when you actually get there in the moment, the person who you're trying to match, especially if they're a master musician, like Mr. Satan, Sterling McGee, they may have their own way of carrying the groove. And if you bring a Chicago thing to a guy on the streets of New York, it may not quite mesh up. And that was my experience, is that I had to, it took me a while to let go and just kind of do my own thing, but it was the biggest gift I could possibly have been given, which is somebody saying basically, you got to do your own thing. It doesn't mean no discipline. It doesn't mean just flail around, but it means really listen and don't use your mind and don't sort of have a preconception like, well, if it's Mojo, it must be Got My Mojo Working, and I should do Little Walter's line or Key Wilson's line. What I found was that if I kind of let go and just here's what I found. I found something crucially important. Very early on, if you're a young white blues harmonica player and you're playing on the streets of Harlem and you care about the music the way I did, you'd be very tempted to say, I got to impress the hell out of these people.
Right.
I got to play every lick I know. What's interesting was that when I tried to impress, quote unquote, when I tried to sort of play fancy, nobody was impressed. They didn't criticize me. Just nobody stopped. The thing about street music is you get instant feedback on what's connecting. And what I found was that when I would just kind of let my inner musical, almost like my musical body, kind of feel it, I'd end up kind of doubling something that Sterling was doing percussion-wise, because he was playing, hi-hat cymbals with his feet as opposed to, and along with guitar.
Wow.
So if I ended up finding something that I could double, this is the best advice I can give to a young blues player who's listening or developing player is try to find something you can double in the person you're playing with. Start with that. It might just be a rhythmic motif. Try to find something you can really hook onto and start with that so that you're really like a marching band or something else where you're really in sync. When you do that, sometimes magic happens. And when magic happens, you know what? People feel it, right? They don't even hear it. They feel it, and people will stop.
Right.
And so I had that experience. Like, when you got it, when you sort of start to notice that things are filling in front of you, right? You got the groove.
Wow, that's groovy. Well, thanks to you, I actually have Mother Mojo, which is performed by yourself and Mr. Satan. And I think I want to get into that real quick to give the audience a taste of what it was like when you guys was rocking out together.
Great. Go ahead. That's great.
The Mother Mojo. Because I'm gonna work it on you. Into Mississippi. I was trying to get the Florida, USA. I made a bad dirty move in Alabama. Let me tell you that I ended in Atlanta, GA. You can bet your bottom dollar, baby, down there. I don't go to look at my mojo, yes, every day. Because I'm gonna work it on you. Out on the highways and the byways of the foolish of the bad joke. People didn't understand. Every grocery store or supermarket, they thought I was a crazy man. They would say, what can I do for you, sir? I say, I want to get a half a dozen of your mojo hands. Because I'm over get out, yeah. I got a mojo, Mr. Gussow, come on and blow. the brother, he surely can. I got to get up right now, people, and I'll get to New Orleans, Louisiana, fast as I can. Got my mojo working, woman. Mother working on you, sister woman, don't you hear me talk about the mother kicking out on so many as a bag? Lord, I got that mother working. The mother working on you, sister woman, gotta tell you about the mother mojo because I'm a working out, y'all. Let's walk a while. With my mojo, I gotta get my mojo, baby, but it's best I go. But before I go, Mr. Gussow, come on, go. Get out on the
Okay, so now that was blues.
Sorry, that was a long lead into your song.
That's okay. That was blues. But what I would like to discuss right now, is that point. Your first what you heard blues wise, because you were teaching harmonica for a while, and don't you teach a blues course now?
Well, now, I mean, I'm at the University of Mississippi, and one of the things that I was sort of brought down here to do, I've always said it's the biggest honor you could have. You know, they brought a New York guy to Mississippi.
Wow.
To teach blues stuff at the University of Mississippi. That's kind of crazy. Who would not want that gig if you do what I do?
Right.
But I'm not teaching sort of instrumental performance in class. I mean, I do occasionally pull out the harp just to demonstrate some element of stuff. But you're interested in, if I were to think back, like deep into the childhood thing?
Yes.
Well, I can tell you. Here's a funny thing. You know, my father was a gifted painter. He was a gifted landscape painter and a fine arts, you know. And when I say gifted, I mean he won something called the Prix de Rome when he was 21. That was sort of in my family. It was like, but he was also a jazz record collector. And I just had an occasion to transfer a bunch of his records up to a house that my family has up in Maine. I brought a bunch of stuff up there in an old, 78 RPM record player. And, Fletcher Henderson, Art Tatum, Bessie Smith. He had a lot of, what's his name from, Louis Armstrong and Sidney Bechet. So he had all these records there. And what he used to do when I would visit him in his studio, he wasn't that big into sharing his painting. That's sort of his private thing. He wasn't pushing me away, but he'd kind of redirect me towards the records. So in a funny way, I really have my father to thank. So the first stuff that I heard that was blues was all these Tiger Rag, kind of boogie-woogie.
Jump music.
He had criteria of taste. He would sort of say, well, that stuff's kind of corny and that stuff's really swinging, but he didn't have much vocabulary like that. He said there was stuff he liked, but he had a wide range of stuff. And so I would say that I heard something like blues pretty early that way. When I was in the spring of my senior year in high school, I had the first experience of hearing live blues. I remember it vividly. And again, it's hard. If you wrote these things in a novel, people would say, well, you're really stretching credibility. I mean, that seems too... The night that my first high school girlfriend broke up with me was a concert at the Rockland Community College.
Wow.
And it was it was James Cotton opening for the Jay Giles Band.
Wow.
This is in 1975. These are like the two, James Cotton and Magic Dick, two of the most powerful, seriously powerful blues harp players at the peak of their power.
Yeah.
And I'm 17 and I'm losing her, and I'm in the memoir I talk about this. It's like it's the worst night of my life and the greatest night. I'm a broken heart, but then there's this incredibly powerful music happening right in front of me as she's telling me we're through.
Wow.
It's like a novel scene, right? But that I lived that. And
It's
I
the
remember
blues.
Actually, what I remember is sort of going to the men's bathroom. I probably was crying, but I was sort of like shaking the harp underneath the sink, like putting water in it and shaking it out and playing, and people in the bathroom say, hey, man, that's cool, keep it up. It's all there. In a weird way, it's all there. Everything that happens after that. What I can tell you is that the other supremely powerful moment was seeing B.B. King that summer, I think probably before I went to college, sort of 2 or 3 months later.
Wow.
At Woolman Skating Rink. Probably was Donald Trump. I don't know if he was the one who got it redone. Anyway, it was in probably the old Woolman Skating Rink in Central Park. And I saw B.B. King, who also in 75, I mean, he was huge. He was huge.
He was huge.
He was powerful as hell, and I still remember vividly. It was Wet Willie who had "Keep On Smiling." That was their big hit, and with a little harmonica in it. Again, that's why I would go. It's like, I'm going to see a blues player in Wet Willie, and then whoever this B.B. King guy is. And I just got knocked right off my feet.
I'm
plugged
happy.
in, and he hit a note, and he couldn't hear it that well, and he cranked everything up to 12. And I was a guitar player. See, I was not just a harp player; I was a blues guitar player.
Okay.
So when to hear B.B. King up close and personal when you're 17 and brokenhearted, that'll do it to you.
That will, because I mean, you made mention to something earlier, and I had the opportunity to talk to a couple of guitarists about this. And when I say guitarists, like, some people play they're the blues, so it comes with a guitar or harp, but yourself and the other gentlemen I spoke to you're a harpist. Those dudes were guitarists. And I asked them, I want to ask you as well, because you made mention, don't try to impress, so to speak. Play what you feel, because then you have some guitarists who are lick happy, and there's no feel, like a B.B. King or an Albert King or a T-Bone Walker, when they just lay on that one bend. And it sounds like you find that the same with the harp. Kind of, and I'll tell you the truth. If you ask me who my favorite blues guitar players were, it's
pretty easy for me right away to say, well, a guy like Albert Collins,
Mm.
I just love that crazy angular trebly. I mean, I had a Telecaster, so it's what he plays, but I never. I mean, what other player can get that sound?
Right.
He gets this incredible, the icy sound, and I just the moment I heard that, I loved it. But when I was learning, it was the three kings, right? It was BB, Albert, and Freddie.
Yes, sir.
Each of them completely individual. When you ask about harp, here's a key thing. And I teach harmonica, and so I always try to impress this on people. You know, you spend the first half of your life learning what to play, and developing players are focused on, you know, what the chords are, what are my melodic choices. You're so focused on what to play, but at a certain moment, ideally, you start to realize the lesson that Miles Davis taught, which is, and I've said this more than once, but I'll repeat myself, which is notes are not music. Notes are a way of getting at music. So notes per se, this is why we've all had the feeling of hearing somebody who seemed to be very proficient with pouring out notes, but it didn't seem that musical. Somehow.
Right.
It's mechanical. Albert Collins or, you know, Albert King, these are guys who somehow, they're getting at the music. But you know, and the note's powerful, but it's not about a whole lot of notes necessarily. So you have to learn when not to play and how to create musical value by choosing to let a note go a little longer than you have to, by choosing how to enter a melodic line, how space can serve you. When people talk about letting the music breathe,
Right.
and that's very important. And even a guy like BB, you know, BB listened a lot to what's his name, the gypsy guitar, Django Reinhardt.
Right.
So he could do that kind of fast jazzy thing, but BB also knows how to leave space, and he also knows how to distill his style down. Because, you know, BB can sound like a lot of different people. You listen to him at different points in his career, and early on he sounds more like T-Bone Walker.
Yeah.
But he also learned how to vocalize. In other words, he was a singer who also played guitar, so he's learning how to hit that high octave when he would go up and go, woo, and kind of hit the high note and slide off it. That's really, he's mimicking what singers do.
Right.
Vocalizations are important.
Very much so.
I'm increasingly learning kind of to listen for that when I listen to how somebody's doing a certain kind of solo. Sometimes they're just doing variations of if you were singing the melody. But they're doing it on a guitar or harp, and you're not, unless you're paying attention to that, you might kind of miss it.
Right. Let me ask you this. Did you put down the guitar, or did your heart was just in the harp? What happened with the guitar?
You know, it's funny, because I was equal parts harmonica and guitar. In my junior year in college, I got into a band with a bunch of guys who were all much better musicians, and I got in as a guitar player. My hero back then was, you know, we were called Spiral, which is a song by the Crusaders.
Right.
And so, when you saw me play at Groove, we opened up with a song called "Put It Where You Want It."
Yes.
The old, as I like to say, the old Imus in the Morning theme song. Although some people go, "Arr." But if you were in New York in the early '70s, you know that, you know, da 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 da.
That's
that
right.
Was just that he had a good ear for music, frankly, and that was an important song to me early on. I played guitar in a college band, and I also went to the Berklee College of Music for 7 weeks between junior and senior year, and so I learned jazz guitar. What I learned that I loved jazz harmonies, that I couldn't be a jazz guitar player, that I could not think jazz.
Wow.
So what I got was, and this is also a useful lesson, is, you know, blues and jazz are side by side, and there's a lot of jazz that works its way into the blues.
Yes.
You know, Big Walter Horton did "Don't Get Around Much Anymore," which is a Duke Ellington song.
Right.
Little Walter was listening to all of those. Jimmy Liggins,
Yes.
the Honey Dripper, becomes the Evan Shuffle. You know, so there's a lot of interplay, and some of the more aware, I think, blues players are listening to jazz and kind of pulling a little bit of it in without really being jazz players per se. And so I became, that's sort of what happened was, I realized I couldn't be a jazz guitar player.
Because you're thinking blues.
And also, because when I came back from Berkeley, the first thing that happened was I'm sitting in this dorm, the living room of the dorm that I'm in, and this kid comes in and he goes, I say, I basically, I'm like you would be if you were you just come back, you're a college senior now, and you just had 7 weeks at the Berkeley College of Music, and you're a guitar player, and you're going to be the big man on campus. And I was like the blues guy who was going to play some jazz in my, and he said, well, why don't you come up to my room and I'll play for you. This was Stanley Jordan.
Wow.
And I come up to Stanley Jordan's room. He's a freshman at Princeton, and he just proceeded to play the kind of stuff he's playing now.
Wow.
And the tapping stuff. And I was like, I quit. I think my heart, I just lost. I said, you knew you didn't play any jazz. Now you really know. Why don't you just forget about the jazz stuff? And I'm a blues guy, but I have a jazz flavor.
Right.
So as a harp player, what you're hearing to some extent is you're hearing a jazz, funk, blues guitar player pulling some of that stuff into what he's doing on the harp. And so, yeah, the funk. I really love funk rhythm guitar. That was just
absolutely
something that let me hear what Sterling was doing. And because he was a funk player, he was in King Curtis's band. He was with King Curtis when Jerry Jamot.
Wow.
Was with King Curtis. Jerry Jamot, actually, I got a chance to meet and become semi-friends with down here in Mississippi, and he played on a couple of cuts on 2 albums that I made. And we knew each other through Sterling McGee, because they were both in King Curtis's band in '68 when Memphis Soul Stew.
Right.
So that's the kind of environment, not hardcore blues, right? What I'm coming out of is as much kind of a New York R&B version of blues as it is Mississippi
Delta blues. Right. Well, I would go as far as calling it rhythm and blues, like you said, the old Memphis sound, even with a touch of Philly and Motown. That was all the blues to me, because I'm a big David Ruffins fan. I'm a big Stax Records. I'm a Stax record over Dover.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. I was listening. One of my favorite cuts. I have it on my list of something that I ought to see if we can add to our mix. I'm not sure, but is the Temptations. They're one of the great blues they do is "I'll Be in Trouble."
Yeah.
And that just grabs me. That's blues.
It is. I mean, I have to be honest. Even though I did listen to them and appreciate a lot of the music after David Ruffins left the group, I kind of protested. So I don't usually say in public. But with that being said, David Ruffins brought the blues to Motown and to the Temptations by wailing and belting like field songs, and that's the blues, that's the blues. Now I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
Okay. Piano, and I'm not going to say it's easy, because no instrument is easy, but the concept of learning a piano is easy, right? Because, when you look at the tablature, when you look at the notation, it's just right there. The keys are right there in front of you. Guitar is not that easy, because then once you understand the chords, the tablature is easy. Once you understand the bends and the pull-offs, the notation, I don't want to say easy, but it's more, you can understand the concept, so to speak.
The tricky thing with guitar is you can make a given note in 2 or 3 different places on the keyboard. You got to figure out a fretboard, and you got to figure out which place you need to go to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, which becomes complicated. So with that being said, how do you go about teaching real harp? How did you go about learning real harp? Now, you discussed it in the memoir, and the reason why I'm asking, speaking to harp players, and I don't want to say I will never say I played a harp, because I had an experience like yourself. I thought I was a big harp player. I was playing around and I was walking around with it. I used to work at a bar, I'd play around at a bar, and I went and saw a friend of mine perform for the first time who was a harp player, and that's when I was like, I'm just going to stick to my guitar.
We've all had the experience of being shut down. That happens to me too. I see guys and I go, oh, geez.
Now, with that being said, there's certain aspects of the harp that you can't really make a diagram for because you're using your throat, you're using your tongue, things of that nature. How did you learn? How did you teach?
Well, I think, for me, it started, I didn't have any teacher for the first 9 years that I played, right? So I was completely self-taught, with one exception. I had that book that all of us had back then by Tony Little Son Glover called Blues Harp, which was sort of the only teaching material out there early on. But it just kind of gave me a little bit of an attitude, I suppose, a sort of orientation. And one point that of course, would be easy to get from that book was all the great players are African American.
Okay.
I mean, that's when he's writing. That's the truth. It's Sonny Terry. It's Little Walter. It's Junior Wells. It's Sonny Boy Williamson.
Junior Wells is one of my favorites, I must say, because he harp, guitar, vocals. That was a bad man, and he was bad on the streets too. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So how to. I mean, I think when I teach people, first of all, I talk about the three things that can't be notated. Okay. So I talk about tone and how important it is just to get a nice sound, and you have to sort of work to make the harmonica sound like something other than a kind of wheezing, squeeze box kind of sound.
Right.
It's easy. As we say, it's an easy instrument to play badly.
Yeah.
It's a hard instrument to play well. But it's a quick start instrument, right? You can kind of get it, and pretty quickly, if you can do something percussive with your breathing, you can kind of make something that sounds like a rhythm.
Okay.
But it's harder to sort of take those next steps. But I think tone, learning how to make one note sound really good, and that involves actually beginning to learn about how to shape your mouth and how to drop your jaw, especially on the lower notes, because to make them sound bigger and fuller.
Right.
Learn vibrato takes a while, but I try to kind of get people going that way. So there's tone, there's what I call kind of blues tonality, or what I call microtonal inflections, kind of how to take that three-hole if we're playing cross harp on let's say a C harmonica, play that three-hole,
right,
whatever note that is. You have to think. I don't know music that way, but it's the two holes, the G on a C harp, the three is probably an E. In E, it's G, A, B. It's a B.
Right.
So to make that B into a sort of a B flat, to kind of flatten that three-hole draw half a step or a little bit less, you have to sort of learn how to do those things, how to make those blues pitches, and I always try to connect people with blues singing, because it's very easy to hear the connection.
Yeah.
Between blues harmonica and blues singing. The early innovators on the harp just figured out if you play this thing cross harp, if you play it a slightly different key than the key that's marked on it, you can kind of, without too much trouble, you can sort of make a really good harmonica version of a human being. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I don't think I had the octave note quite right, but that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Try to connect it, right? And then the rhythm, and learning how to use your tongue rather than your breath. So you how to take one breath, but kind of cut it in pieces, kind of cut it up in multiple pieces, and kind of get a chord rhythm, and then how to syncopate the rhythm. So to me, if you get each of those things going and begin to learn how to syncopate, how to kind of get a little kick, maybe like an early hit on one of those chords, a kind of percussive chord.
Right.
Can you hold one sec? You know what I want to do? Hold one sec. I'm going to
Sure.
get a harp. I'm going to show you exactly what I mean.
Sure.
All right. So if I have a B flat harp here, and I said, if I just pick up the harmonica, I'm going to sound. I'm going to just sort of make 2 or 3 notes at a time. They're going to be kind of like that.
Right.
You have to learn how to shape your mouth, get one note. Let's say I want to get the 2. And I can go from a kind of compressed mouth to a drop my jaw. Much sort of smoother. That's much more noticeable on the one hole.
Right.
get a little vibrato. You know, and as I talk about in my book, when Nat Riddles first played some of that stuff, and with that vibrato, that sort of smooth vibrato, it just blew my mind.
Right.
I didn't know, did not know that could be done. I was going, and he goes, wow.
Yeah.
So how does that, and you can spend a lifetime chasing that kind of thing, and saying, I'm going to get that. But the rhythm, I mean, that's so crucial. When Nat used to play, he had incredible kind of kick on his notes.
Right.
I still can't do it the way he does. Where every note. And some of that's learning tongue blocking techniques, and so I would say part of what harmonica players have to learn is the difference between lip pursing and tongue blocking, between kind of one note and in fact, in the memoir I talk about Nat, the first time he did something like this. Or he would go, but it was that first thing. And there was like three different things going on at the same time, and when you first hear it, it's very hard to process. How does somebody make all those sounds?
Exactly. I do know. Listening to you right now, and I'm going to tell you, listening, because I listen to a lot of Charlie Patton, Willie Brown, Son House, and Robert Johnson. I mean, Robert Johnson's story has made him a rock star, but if you really listen to those, and all these guys came out of the Charlie Patton camp.
Yeah.
And you listen to them, they make that acoustic, that national sound like an entire orchestra.
Yes, they do, don't they?
So I do get what you're saying, because you had 3-4 different sounds going, but it was one, it was just one smooth. It was very, very soothing. That was groovy, because you're such an interesting cat. I wanted to get your story out, but I would like to discuss the movie a tad bit as well.
Sure. Yeah, so, back in 1995, when my duo Satan and Adam had been out there kind of as a kind of regional/national blues act for about 4 years. We kind of came on the scene in 91 with Harlem Blues. That was our debut. We'd been out there for a while. It wasn't slowing down, but it wasn't speeding up. It was kind of cresting in some way.
Right.
And Scott, this young filmmaker, came along in Pittsburgh. We had a gig at a place called The Decade in Pittsburgh. People said, "Well, that's run by a mafia guy, a made man." and he came to this gig, and he said basically, "I want to make my next documentary about you guys." And he said, "I've made this documentary about this blind street singer, and I want you guys to be my next thing." And this is 1995. This is 20 years ago.
Wow.
Well, and we said, "Hey, sounds good. 3 or 4 years, and 2 or 3 years. Who knows? I mean, a year? Yeah, sure. Follow us for a year and make a documentary. That'll help the act, right?" And he began to. I mean, when I say follow, that wasn't quite true. He didn't come to every gig. Didn't come to every 10th gig, but a few times a year he'd kind of come, and I remember him filming us in Syracuse, and he came to Philadelphia and other places. Well, that was 20 years ago. And he followed us to the point where in 1998, Sterling had a kind of nervous breakdown and was in a psychiatric hospital and disappeared. and I'm there in New York, and Satan and Adam is no more. It's just, but Scott was there. He got it. He tracked Sterling down. I had a minor heart attack back in 1998.
You did?
excuse me, in 2000, I was actually sort of going down to Florida to see Sterling. I think he discovered Sterling. I didn't get to see him that time. I was in the hospital. But in 2002, I think, I finally got a chance to see him. Anyway, long story short, 2002, Sterling shows up in this Social Security home in Gulfport, Florida, which is part of St. Petersburg. And he cannot play a note. He goes from being the great guitar genius, one-man band, to like a broken-down guy in a nursing home.
Wow.
With too many drugs in him. You know, they're trying to basically pacify him.
Wow.
And it was just heartbreaking for me. Scott got that on the film. I haven't seen that footage, but I remember the day vividly because I was just shocked.
Absolutely.
It was very hard for me to put that man together with the guy that I knew as the great griot of 125th Street. And
I'm happy you used that word, griot, because most people don't even know what that is and where it comes from. You know,
griot. Well, you know, the griots were in Mali and Senegal, Gambia. They were guys who basically, in some ways, they were good guys, but they were opportunistic musicians who'd been sort of associated with royal families, and their job was to basically sit around and sing songs about the royal family that made the royal family look good.
Right. And also, like travel.
Yes,
I would say
loosely
bohemians, right?
There was an element of that. They were the legend keepers and the storytellers,
which is what the blues is.
And Sterling basically had that role. In fact, there's a song that I hope you play a little bit of in the podcast called "Freedom for My People."
Absolutely.
Which is it's the full version, which is copyright. Well, I mean, I own the recording. You can. This particular version we recorded in 1990, and it's just been reissued, so you can use it with my blessings. But it's a song that he wrote that's just an astonishing kind of anthem. It's not a blues, really. It's sort of a, if you will, a celebration for and lament for Black America at a particular moment in time. Very apropos still. It's a brilliant song. It should be. I hope it's sort of the outro music in the documentary. Anyway, that one of the many things we did. It's the song that we played when U2 came by in 1987. Some people might remember there was a brief scene in Rattle and Hum, the U2 documentary. Now, your audience may not be a rock audience. I'm not a rock guy, but U2 came by when we were playing in Harlem, and that little bit of that song got out there in their rock video.
That's groovy.
The film is called Satan and Adam. It's being sort of finished as we speak. There's an Indiegogo campaign because Scott and his co-producer JR kind of need all the help they can get to pay it's like musical permissions if you want to use a little bit of somebody else's music in your film. It's called sync rights, synchronization rights, and it's expensive. And there's all kinds of things that cost money when you're trying to make a film that can take you all the way to the Oscars, that can take you to the big film festivals, and that's what they're trying to do. So maybe you can give people a link.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. Now, do you have an album out now?
Well, yeah. You know, there's a couple of recent Satan and Adam albums that I've put out on my own. You can call it a label. It's just what I call the stuff that I do. It's on Modern Blues Harmonica, which is my website. But there's an album that we released in 2011 called Back in the Game. That's the one with Jerry Jamot playing on at least one of the tunes. A tune called Thunky Fang Rides Again. But it's called Back in the Game, and if you were to just Google, you know, Satan and Adam Back in the Game, you'd come right to the website, or you'd go to iTunes. It's on iTunes and Amazon.
Groovy.
And I'd urge people to go and check out the previews on that. And then there's a live album that I released a few months ago. That was from a show that a guy caught on a DAT recorder back in '93 when we were really kicking, as Sterling would say, kicking and stomping. Kicking A and stomping D is the way he'd put it. We were pretty powerful at that point. Right? Still feeling the streets in our bones. And that's a live album called Throw Down, which was a term that I heard in Harlem, and I swear to God, it took me 20 years to know what it meant. People say, throw down. And I understood them to be saying basically, kind of play hard, show me what you got. It took me years to figure out it was just cards, throw down your hand. I swear to God, I didn't get this. I have a PhD. Did not occur to me. They're talking about cards.
Wow.
I swear. Until 5 years ago, I said, oh, wait a minute. Throw down your cards. Oh!
Well, you know something? I'm happy you brought that up, because I want to ask, and I don't want to hold you too long, because I could speak to you for hours.
I'm happy to chat.
For you, how did it feel being this white dude from a different culture, a different scholastic scene, but having this DNA of this music in you, and then going down there and being amongst the natives? How did that feel?
Well, see, people often get this part of my story wrong. When I in '86, when I first played with him, I had been out of grad school for about a year, so I had been an English graduate student at Columbia University. And when that girlfriend left me and she leaves me for a guy in the English department, I did not want to be in graduate school.
Understood.
So you could say part of what's going on, I'm turning my back on that whole world, but I also, I can't really explain. When you have a broken heart, you can't sit still and read books. I mean,
right.
But here's the other thing. I'd always been schizophrenic, which is to say I'd always had two sides. So the one, if I had one thing I wanted people to understand, is that I'm not slumming. Just to say, somebody might say, and I worry, even, I got to be honest with the way that Scott, I love Scott, I love JR. Of course, the very first words on the Indiegogo campaign are to describe me as, Princeton grad. Well, that's true. I went there. In fact, I have 2 degrees from Princeton. And I have a degree from Columbia. I have 3 Ivy League degrees. That's true. I try to tell people, don't hold it against me. The key thing is, like the first paper I did as a freshman in 1974 at Princeton, as a kid I was a townie in my local day school.
Okay, wait. Now,
a guy with no. I came from a family with no money, but I went to school with people with money.
That was the question. What is a townie? Because
a townie is the guy who lives in the same same town as the. A townie is usually like the local guy who is not good enough to go to the school. In my case, I went to the school. A townie is usually a term used by people in a college to talk about people who they think of as trash. Okay. That word townie kind of means that. It means a local, but it means probably not good enough to go to this place. And in the case of my school, it wasn't like that. It was just. So I went to a school, sort of a little druggy little day school. But here's the thing: when I was a freshman at Princeton, I wrote the first paper in my history of jazz class was a paper on B.B. King, in which I was trying to find a way of representing what he was doing on the guitar, like on the page. So I've been split my whole life. Not split. I'm hardly comfortable. It's both sides are who I am. Between music, I don't read music.
Really?
Really. I read, as there's a word for it when you're not somebody who can read, but you can kind of, if somebody gives you 2 hours, you can pick your way through a score.
Absolutely.
And I can barely do that. I did learn how to play. I bought the sheet music for The Entertainer by Scott Joplin, and I can do a version, I can.
Wow.
I figured that out many years ago. But I'm a guy who's a by-ear musician, and I'm also a guy who reads books and who writes.
Right, you're an artist. There's nothing wrong with that.
Those two sides, right? And I even actually, I write occasional songs. I'm not much of a songwriter, but I write occasional songs. But what I don't want people to think is, okay, so broken-hearted guy, and he's slumming in Harlem. By the time I got to Harlem, I had been out of grad school for 2 years, and I had been a street musician in New York, on and off for about a year, and then I'd been in Europe and played in any number of different cities. So I'd put in a lot of time trying to, doing this. And I can't say that I had any option inside my own head.
Right. Well,
that was where I was. I mean, I knew I had to be doing what I was doing. I honestly thought that I was destroying whatever career that I might have doing anything else. But I said it doesn't matter because I have to do this because this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Right.
And my parents, luckily, didn't tell me I was wrong.
Well, that's good. The support is always good.
But I was 100% committed to what I was doing, and Sterling and I just happened to find each other at kind of the right people for each other. And the proof's in the pudding. We're still, and I haven't played with him in a year, but we lasted 25 years. We're still, I could go down to Gulfport. I could drive down tomorrow, and we could go and play on the street if we wanted to. I mean, we're still, we were the right players for each other. We both had the same, he was a guy who'd been here's the thing, he had been a salaried Brill Building songwriter with Jesse, I'm blocking on his name, very famous songwriter, Jesse, not Davis, not Washington, Jesse. Anyway, he was a salaried songwriter. He was a big band guy, and he ends up on the street playing.
Wow.
But by the time he was doing it, he wanted to be there. He'd come in and out of alcoholism and basically was clean when I met him.
Wow.
He wouldn't touch the stuff. Then he got back into it, but that's after we'd been playing for a while and go back and forth.
Right.
The point is, the documentary, and there's something else that needs to be said. Two other things we really ought to chat about. One is, what was it like for the two of us when New York is exploding around us with all of this stuff, this racial aggression and madness, and it was impactful. There was certainly a period after Yusef Hawkins was killed. Basically, he called me and said, "You know what? You probably ought to stay away for a couple of weeks because my people are mad."
Yeah, it was a rough time in the city. I remember.
A rough time.
Yeah.
And it was kind of heartbreaking. There was no question that the two of us, and I'm not projecting this into him. He would say, "Mister, we're doing our thing, and we're giving people, something to look at apart from all that mother effing madness." He didn't use four-letter words. He actually was he corrected my language all the time.
That's very ironic.
It is.
For somebody with the name Satan.
He did not like when people would curse. He would, and he was very respectful. He would call everybody Mr., Miss, Sir. It was like he was trying to pull everybody up to his own gentlemanly level. Now, when I say gentlemanly, he was harsh in his own way. Right. But harsh the way that a very shrewd street preacher might be harsh, to kind of pull people. I mean, he had some of that thing that Malcolm X had, which is he had that incredible rhetorical power. That one-on-one, I'm going to debate you into the ground till you're laughing and don't know which side is up. Right. He could do that. He knew the Bible backwards and forwards. If somebody came up and said, "Why do you call yourself Satan?" God forbid a minister. He knew more Bible than any of the ministers. Wow. I mean, he knew it all. He did not like religious people. He was very cynical about he thought their motives were entirely cynical. I think he's moderated a little bit. But
well, religion and spirituality is two totally separate things.
Yes. One thing I've discovered is that the way that he being from Mississippi, his attitude as a, if you will, blues performer or R&B performer, his attitude towards ministers was very continuous with what I've found down here. In fact, I remember at one point talking to a guy who was, again, I'm blocking on names, but it's getting a little bit late. There was a guy down here who did a lot of teaching of young people, teaching them the blues, and I jammed with him at one point on the street. He was in Oxford, and we just kind of did a little bit of playing. And I was doing a book. In fact, I've completed a 7-year, basically, a project on the devil and the blues tradition. Got a full-length monograph on that. And I said, people tell me that they talk about blues as the devil's music. He raised his hand. He goes, "Let me tell you about that." And then he said the following. I'm going to quote this verbatim. "By the time that minister gets his hand on $1, the blues man's had 2 chances at it." Yeah. And I knew right away what he meant. I just looked at him. I said, "Friday night and Saturday night." He goes, "That's right." So
Yeah.
So Sterling's attitude was that same attitude. It was that, the collection plate is just the minister's way of, he's just busking too.
Understood.
But he's putting me down, so I'm going to give him back as good as he's giving me.
Right.
It was sort of.
Right. So that who's holier than thou cast the first stone. I get it.
That was his, yeah. And so he would say things like, "Well, now, I'm Mr. Satan. I speak for myself. Tell Jesus to come and talk for himself if he's so big and bad." I mean, it was this edgy kind of stuff that made the men who hung out around us very happy. But again, he would give people money. He knew how to consolidate his power base.
Absolutely.
There's, Lamont, there was one other thing that I was thinking we should chat about just briefly.
Sure.
If there's space in your podcast.
Sure.
Which is the New York blues scene as an idea. Because that's what I came up in. That's what, Sterling got to New York in the late 60s. Demobilized as a paratrooper, I think, out of Germany. He talked about that. It actually probably came in the mid-'60s, so he had a lot of time there, although he was born and raised in Mississippi and then Florida. The New York blues scene, when we were coming up, when we were playing 86 through 91, a series of acts came out of New York who, until recently, two of them are still out there, one of them just fell apart. The Holmes brothers were of course, one of the great acts. They presided over the jam session at Dan Lynch, the blues bar where I learned how to play. The Holmes brothers, and I'm saying this for a reason. Three acts: the Holmes brothers, Shamika Copeland, who I remember seeing one of her very first gigs at the club called Chicago Blues, where she was there with her father before her father passed, Johnny Copeland. She was 16 when I saw her, and it was like, wow. And Papa Chubby, Ted Horowitz. These three acts were sort of all came out of New York in roughly the same 4 to 5 year period between sort of 90 and 95. And all of them have something in common, and certainly Papa Chubby and the Holmes brothers and Satan and Adam do, which is they're not just blues. There's a blues kind of base in the gumbo.
Right.
But there's rock, there's country in the case of the Holmes brothers. There's a little bit of jazz and Texas swing. I mean, so all of us, I ended up deciding that the New York blues style was sort of partly about, it's not just one thing. It's sort of other stuff added in. It's not that classicized kind of the West Coast sound or the Chicago sound. Chicago's very conservative.
Yes.
It was Sugar Blues, although he spent a lot of time in Chicago, he's more typical of the New York sound. Edgy, funky. Funk is a big element of the New York sound, and I do think I once wrote about this in an essay that was published in a book called Journeyman's Road. Actually, in the introduction to that, trying to understand the New York blues sound. My friend Frankie Paris, the late Frankie Paris. Did you know Frankie?
I did not know him personally. No.
Frankie was a Italian American guy. Grew up, playing in basically a black soul vocal quartet.
Wow.
Out of Boston. Frankie, Irving Lewis Latin, another good example of New York blues sound, comes out of Chicago, but he with Southern roots, and Chicago sound, but he also was, a pop singer.
I'm definitely familiar with Irving.
Mix,
yeah.
And I think New York blues players should keep their heads high. That's our legacy.
I'm happy you brought the New York blues scene up, because you travel back and fro, I would imagine, pretty often. What do you think of the New York blues scene currently?
I don't travel enough to offer an informed opinion. What I know is that when I talk to people, I mean, I come back a couple of times a year, but I haven't played in New York. And Groove was the first Manhattan gig since 2007.
Okay.
I played in Brooklyn at one point. Usually I play like at the Turning Point. I play with Robert Ross sometimes, and my understanding is that things are tough. I mean, I remember when Terra Blues was the new place,
right?
And when Dan Lynch closed, and then Manny's Car Wash was there. I remember the days when I came up that we had a place called Abilene, we had Wonderland, and Chicago Blues on the corner of 14th Street and 9th Avenue. I mean, I remember jam sessions at all those places, and you could go to 3 jam sessions a week with no trouble at all. I think there are jam sessions now, but I don't think there's as many in Manhattan. And actually, I played that fall, believe it or not. I played a place called Mills Tavern or Mills Pub, which was it was like a hellhole, probably a former union boozing joint. But here's the thing. I mean, my life has been crazy. The first serious gig I had as a harp player in New York was a duo gig there, and Paul Butterfield, this is in '85, Butterfield,
Wow.
who died 2 years later, is sitting there in his blue jeans and his black leather jacket getting trashed at the bar while I'm playing.
Wow.
One of my heroes, Butterfield. He walks back, kind of totters back past me. He goes, nice playing, man. And it was like, wow.
Yeah, that is groovy.
85. So
Wow.
that was New York. It was a different kind of scene. But I'm not one of these old timers who goes, it was so great then, and everybody complained then. There's always a reason to complain.
Right.
That's what we do.
Well, yeah, as humans. So why don't you tell the good people where they can find you, your Twitter or Instagram or your website, so they can get the music and the books?
Well, so I don't actually, I don't have Twitter or Instagram. What I do have, though, is I guess you could say an industry-leading website. If you were to Google the words Blues Harmonica, you'd find it right away. It's called Modern Blues Harmonica.
And YouTube, because you put up lessons up there, right?
Yeah, and I've got, if you go to YouTube and you put the name Adam Gussow in, you'll find, literally, I've got 520 videos at this point, and about half of them are probably instrumental, sort of, here's how to do such and such on the harp. So there's a lot out there. More of them in the first couple of years than recently. But they can go to Modern Blues Harmonica. They can Google, Gussow, Modern Blues Harmonica, and it'll come up. I have a biography page there. My current act is called The Blues Doctors. And so anytime, if you want to find that stuff, just go to YouTube and go Blues Doctors Gussow. That'll all come up. And we're on, the Blues Doctors have an album called Rooster's Happy Hour, which is on, the usual Amazon and iTunes.
Groovy.
But it's easy to get me. If you need to contact me, you can go to the contact page towards the end of Modern Blues Harmonica's list of pages, and my email is right there. I'm easy to find.
Man, groovy.
I have an AOL address, so it's easy to find me.
AOL is definitely, it's like a good
General
Chevy.
Motors, maybe?
Exactly.
It's kind of a little outdated, but they're still around and hanging in there.
But tough, though. Tough. So, listen, Adam, It was, man, a blast. And, we got to get you back up here, man, because you're a wealth of just musical and street musical wisdom, which is pretty much the blues or just music, period, because a good majority of great musicians started out on the street,
Yes, absolutely. And New York, and Philadelphia, a lot of those places, but absolutely, and Chicago, they all have these traditions of music coming right off the street. I'm really happy to be a part of that. Yeah.
Groovy.
Well, let me one more thing for folks to look, because on October 15th, I'm actually publishing that first novel that I struggled to write so many years ago and finally have completed and got right. It's called Busker's Holiday. Busker is a street performer, so Busker's Holiday. So I'd have people, look for that. It'll be out there on Amazon. It'll be an ebook and all that stuff. So maybe you can find that, track that down, and that tells the true story of how it all kind of happened. But Lamont, it's been a real pleasure of mine. I'd love to come back when that Devil Blues book, if it finally gets published, and tell people about the devil and the blues.
Absolutely. I'll definitely have you back on.
Cool.
You guys have been bluesing with Talking About the Blues, and we just had one hell of a guest, Adam Gussow, an amazing blues harp, funk harp, jazz harp, just harpist. And he's told his story and his journey about the blues and his journey with Mr. Satan. And you remember, if you don't do nothing, keep God first and keep on bluesing.